All righty. This passage I did not pick. It picked me. It was in the lectionary. Sometimes, I just want to turn the page and do next week's, but that wouldn't be fair to Ray. And sometimes doing something that upsets you, or you think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to think and work about this one. You get to be of an age and you like to get your brain working more often than not, right? So we're going to give this one a go. Read along with me. Comes from an interesting translation. It's from the Gospel of Luke, and I have more to say about that in a couple of minutes. They're walking along, and Jesus says the following: I came to cast fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already blazing. There is a baptism that I must undergo, and how great is my distress until it is over. Do you think I am here to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but to cause division. For from this time, if there are 5 people in a house, they will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Father will be opposed to son, and son to father, mother to daughter, daughter to mother, mother-in-law to her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law to her mother-in-law. And to the people, Jesus said, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, there's a storm coming, and come it does. And when you see that the wind is in the south, you say, it will be burning hot, and so it proves. Hypocrites! You know how to judge the earth and the sky. How is it then that you cannot judge this time? Well, what do we think about that? This is the interactive part of the sermon. You may express yourself at this moment. A little distressing. Some of the Gospels even say, I do not come to bring peace, I come to bring a sword. What a time in which we live, and that's the passage here on this lovely August Sunday when the fog has rolled in and it's yet to be hot, and the surf is up, and everyone's on the beach, and we're here. Aren't you glad you're not me? Shall we pray? Oh God, may the words of my mouth, may whatever comes out this morning be at the very least useful for the sake of your world, for all of us. Thoughtful, provocative, even hopeful. Amen. So, the way I'm going to tackle this is I'm going to try to set the piece that I just read, what they call the pericope. The pericope that I just read, I'm going to set that in the context of the Gospel of Luke, where Luke, who is trying to tell us something from way back at the end of the 1st century, about somebody who lived 60, 50, maybe 70 years before they put their gospel together. And they have something they're trying to tell us, and they're using in stories that they have and sayings and threading them together to create a narrative, and I'm going to try to set this in that context. Then I'm going to set it in the context of Roman history. And believe me, I'm hoping this will only take 15 minutes. So, but you're just going to have to, so we'll just sort of set all that in motion, and then we'll sort of rest with that for a second, and I'll try to come up with something that will help us and our ears and our hearts in this moment in the 21st century. I have no idea if this mic is live, so I'm going to move it that way. All right. Okay. And I'm going to roam a little. Not R-O-M-E. I'm going to roam here. Okay. So the Gospel of Luke. It's the one that begins in the temple Yeah, you remember that. No, you don't. So it's the one begins with Elizabeth and her husband, who's the priest, Simon, and he is blinded in the temple, and he gets the word that John the Baptist is going to be born via his wife, who's a quite elderly woman. John the Baptist is born, and we have the visit of Gabriel to Mary, and then we have the birth of Jesus. Only in Luke's gospel do we hear that story. And the angels come and say what? He will bring peace on earth. That doesn't sound like peace on earth. So peace on earth, boy, is born in this little village named Bethlehem. And from there, we meet John the Baptist, who preaches in the wilderness, all kinds of things in Luke's gospel, not in other places. He calls the people outside of Jerusalem a brood of vipers. Jesus gets baptized. He begins calling disciples. There's some healing, there's a little bit of preaching, and then he hits Nazareth, where they want to throw him off the cliff. So if we have this idea that the gospel story is about Jesus, who's born in this lovely setting with shepherds and angels and all these cute animals and this stuff, and he calls disciples and he says really pithy sayings and lovely stories and does some healing, and eventually a few crabby people catch him and crucify him, then we haven't read the Gospels. It's not such an easy tale. It goes back and forth. He goes into the countryside and he meets resistance almost right away, and it's serious, it's violent resistance. Something about Jesus is provoking this in people. Jesus tells some more stories, does some more healings, and he starts telling his disciples that he's going to be crucified. The reaction to that is not good. They go up to have the story of the Transfiguration, if you remember, on the mountaintop. And he's revealed in all his glory. And as they start down the mountain, that's when Jesus resolutely, in Luke's gospel, heads towards Jerusalem. And the closer he gets to Jerusalem, the more conflicted he finds himself with the powers that be, the religious authorities, the political authorities, and he knows that when he gets to Jerusalem, and his disciples are walking behind him going, what the heck? And Jesus is getting more and more frustrated with them because they're not listening, they're not noticing what is happening. And Jesus knows what's going to happen when he gets to Jerusalem. It's an interesting thing for Christians to ponder sometimes what would have happened. How would the resurrection feel if Jesus had simply died of old age, surrounded by his disciples, and faded away? It would be a little different, wouldn't it? Than him being killed on a cross. And I'll have more to say about that in a couple of minutes. But that's an interesting thing to ponder, how important the cross and that moment is to the nature of Christian faith. So Jesus does get eventually to Jerusalem, but this passage happens when he's coming back down the mountain. They're heading to Jerusalem, and he's particularly frustrated with his disciples. And now we want to think about the world in which Jesus, remember there's two historical moments. There's the first 30 years of what we call the Common Era, and then there's 50 years after that when the Gospel of Luke is being put together. And those are actually two very different historical moments. So let's just take Jesus' moment for a second. The Roman Empire, and people say things today like we're at the end of an empire, right? People toss that around. Well, Rome had actually 3 different kind of epochs. It was around a long time. I don't think we quite realize that Rome has a 1,000-year history. So 700, 800 years before Christ was even born, Rome appears, the city in Italy, and there's 200 and some odd years of kings who gain power through military might, who oppress the people, and they get tired of it. And you know, this is way before Thomas Jefferson, way before John Adams, way before all of that. And the people rose up against the tyrant kings. This now is about 500 years before the birth of Christ. And they create a republic. They create checks and balances. They create a Senate. They create a body in which people can be elected, so that the plebes, the ordinary people, have a voice in their government. And it's called the republic. And it lasts pretty well for 300, 400 years, and then it starts to show some cracks. People start raising their own armies. They decide they want more power. The rich become richer. You can imagine the story and how that goes. And one of those cracks, about 7,500 years before Jesus is born, one of those cracks that we see in the Republic is the slave rebellion. Remember Spartacus, the movie Spartacus? So the slaves start in a small band, and the gladiators come together, and they begin to fight against the Republic. And the rebellion is put down, and when it's put down, the powers that be, because their favorite way of spreading fear among the people were these public executions, and they crucified 6,000 slaves. From Rome south, about 120 miles, they put 3,000 slaves on crosses on either side of the Appian Way, about half a football field apart, for 120 miles. And they crucified them. Let me tell you, they didn't have a slave rebellion after that. Just think of that. The Appian Way was like, I don't know if it was Route 5 or the 405, but it was the highway south. So if you were going anywhere, if you were trading with Rome, you had to go by. They just left them up forever till they rotted. And that has happened. And soon after that, Caesar crosses the Rubicon, and the Republic is gone, and we now have the world of the divine emperors, beginning with Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Some of those names you probably know, especially Caligula and Nero. In Jesus' lifetime, it would have been Augustus and Tiberius. And during that time, the Romans under the General Pompey had taken over Judea, taken over Palestine. And there's some talk among historians about whether there was an organized resistance or not to the empire. But what we do know is that in Galilee, and if you remember in the Gospels, there's some, occasionally people say things like, can anything good come out of Galilee? Well, one of the reasons is that Galilee was this hotbed of continual, they had these bandits that lived up in the hills, sort of like the French resistance. And they would come down out of the caves, and they'd like come in and attack trade caravans. Or they were like Robin Hood, okay? Taking from the rich, giving to the poor. So the peasants there appreciated the work of the bandits, but Rome did not. And if Tiberius was alive today and an emperor here, he would probably have sent some sort of predator military drone out there to see what was going on. But instead, what Rome did is figure out that they could lower baskets with soldiers in them over the hillside into the caves where the bandits were and attack them that way. So this activity is all happening around Jesus, in the place where he grew up. This is what is occurring. At the same time, it's a very violent world. It's a cruel world. It's a violent world lit only by fire. You have to remember that. I think it's Proust who said, "The past is a foreign country." It's hard for us to imagine what it would have been like to have been alive at that time. They have found the word they use, archaeologists use, is graffiti, because they would paint posters or announcements for the community in the Roman Empire on the walls of buildings. And they have found one which was announcing a big festival of gladiator games and stuff in Pompeii. And in this poster, there was one of the lines was, "And there will be crucifixions." That's the world in which Jesus lived. And it continues in a different way in the world in which the Gospel of Luke comes together. Because by the time the Gospel of Luke is put together, the general Titus, who would later become emperor, has come in and quelled a Jewish revolt, burnt Jerusalem to the ground, destroyed the temple, done terrible things in the countryside as he headed south to Jerusalem, because he took his armies the northern route and then headed south. So this is the time. And we cannot read or listen to the many words in the New Testament without these caveats, without recognizing that this is the soil out of which these words have emerged, to somehow try and figure out how to make it sense for us, for our 21st century ears. Ears that have heard words like artificial intelligence, who can do video phone calls, who can call 10,000 miles away somebody and it sounds like they're right next door. How do we possibly understand? Hope is a funny word, not ha-ha funny. It's a word that we grab onto. We long for it to mean something real and material and present and possible. And that it will give us like some kind of magic talisman, some kind of strength to live through the history in which we live. I'm going to offer a couple of things. The first one is, one of the things that gives me hope is recognizing the strength of human beings. Because if you look at history at all and you go back and you think about the times in which human beings have lived and what they have lived through and what they have survived and how they have come out and how they have worked together to create something better and more beautiful out of whatever ashes there are, or to build on what is happening and help their neighbor, help each other, grow communities, even in the midst of terrible things occurring. Anybody who's been through any kind of disaster recognizes that possibility in humans, that what we can do. You know, I've spent most of my life living in Manhattan, in New York City. Grew up in that neck of the woods. And I have to tell you, if I was in trouble, now this may come as a surprise for tourists, but if I was in trouble, I would rather be in the middle of New York City than just about any place in the world. Because if you're in trouble, you not only have about 20 people around you, 3 of them are going to be experts in whatever trouble you're in. If you break your leg, you're sure to have an orthopedic surgeon in the crowd. That's what it's like. New York is an amazing place that way, and I think part of it has to do with the closeness. You're living on an island. There's not a lot of escape. You have to figure out how to live together. And maybe one of our problems is that we've carved out communities so that we don't have to live together. I find this passage searing in terms of what Jesus' presence in that world meant for him. And as a result, for all of us, because of course he did not die into old age. He was killed by the state because he was a pain in the neck, because he was causing trouble, because his presence in Palestine at that moment in history was going to explode into something they didn't want to deal with, so they killed him in the most disreputable, shaming, horrible way you can think of. And believe me, the Romans had very sharp minds on figuring out how to torture people to death. The other thing is that in our Christian equation about what it means to think about Jesus, the words we use that are part of all of our creeds, that are kind of the base belief, whether you think of it as metaphor or myth or some kind of reality, is Jesus is fully human and fully divine. And what does that mean for us? If we say that it's possible for what is divine to be present in human nature, in the material being of a human person, of a young man, age 30 maybe, walking those dusty streets in the midst of that time and place, that something of the divine is present in that moment, says two things. It says that the divine, what is holy, what absorbs and holds everything together and interconnects all of us, has been present and understands what it means to be alive and humankind can be Jesus. Humankind can be that person, exasperated, hot, thirsty, angry at his disciples because they don't see, but still full of the compassion and love and arms open for the people that he moves amongst. It is what we could be. This Jesus, who is willing to be this honest about the state of the world that he's in, and yet within that sees something worth saving. It's as if some hand in the resurrection digs itself deep into the earth and finds the end of some long-dead weed and pulls on it until it comes out of the earth, and what you see at the end is the bulb of a magnificent flower. It's that shocking. That's how the resurrection should feel. Two final things. There's an Anglican philosopher, theologian, literary critic named Terry Eagleton who wrote a book called Hope Without Optimism. Hope without optimism. And the quote I'm going to read is as searing as what Jesus says, but I'm reading it to you because I am seared by it. Not so much that it is a judgment from me in this pulpit upon us, but I am seared by this quote. And he writes, optimists are conservatives because their faith in a benign future is rooted in their trust in the essential soundness of the present. An optimist is so much a part of the way things are that they view the future as just a continuation of whatever goodness they feel. Optimists are conservatives because their faith in a benign future is rooted in their trust in the essential soundness of the present. Indeed, and this is the searing part, optimism is a typical component of ruling class ideologies. So what is hope? Hope is born in that frustration, in that reality check, in that pointing to what is, saying things don't look good. I'm sniffing the air and it doesn't look good, doesn't sound good, doesn't feel good. But in spite of that, I am going to go forward. In spite of what I believe might be coming, I am going to maintain that love is everything. And finally, back to the, what do I have to fear? There's a quote, and I got to tell you, I don't remember. So long ago I heard it. Goes something like this. Bad religion gives you a rabbit's foot, tells you to put it in your pocket, and you'll make it through the deep forest. Good religion tells you there is nothing to be afraid of. Amen.